Welcome to Mixie Veteran Stories, where unlikely encounters and quiet moments can awaken memories long buried. This story doesn't begin in a battlefield. It begins in a quiet park, with a boy, a sketch pad, and an old man everyone ignored. But when one child saw what no one else did and turned it into art, a forgotten life was suddenly placed in the spotlight, for the whole town and eventually the world to see. Every morning on his walk to school, Liam Carter, 12 years old, would pass through Holleridge Park. It was the long way around, sure, but it was quieter, and Liam liked quiet. He didn't have many friends, didn't say much in class, but give him a pencil and paper, and the world seemed to unfold at his fingertips. So when Ms. Delgado, his 6th grade art teacher, gave the class a new assignment, draw a real person. Not from memory, not from a photo, someone real, someone you can sit and study. Liam knew exactly where he'd go. There was an old man who sat on the same bench every morning, under the rusted statue of a World War II soldier. Liam had noticed him for months, always at the same time, always in the same spot, with the same jacket that said 3rd Infantry Division, Vietnam Veteran. A dark green cap pulled low over white hair, hands folded, eyes staring at something far beyond the pond in front of him. Most people passed without a glance. But Liam? He slowed down. He watched. And now, he'd draw. The first time Liam sat across the walking path with his sketch pad, he thought the man might say something. But the old man didn't even look up. So Liam came back the next day. And the next, always from a respectful distance. He didn't try to talk, he just drew. The lines on the man's face fascinated him, like rivers on a weathered map. The slight droop of his shoulders, the way his hands never quite relaxed. And most of all, the look in his eyes. Sad, but not broken. Heavy, but proud. Like he had seen everything, and still came back. For 5 mornings, Liam came to that bench. He erased, redrew, shaded, adjusted. Sometimes he'd look at his sketch and feel like it still wasn't enough, like he hadn't captured something yet. But he kept going. By the end of the week, the portrait was done. Not perfect, not polished, but it felt honest. And when he brought it to class, Ms. Delgado stared at it for a long time, longer than any other drawing. She didn't smile. She didn't clap. She just, "Liam, who is this man?" Liam shrugged gently. "I don't know," he said, "but he looked like someone worth drawing." Ms. Delgado held the portrait in her hands like it was something fragile, something that might vanish if she blinked too hard. She said nothing at first. Just looked at the lines etched in graphite, the shadow around the eyes, and the weariness that somehow made it all feel alive. Other students had drawn their friends, their parents, even themselves. But this was something else. "Can I show this to Mr. Green?" she asked. Liam hesitated. Mr. Green was the assistant principal, the guy who handled fire drills and tardy slips. He wasn't exactly artsy. "Sure," Liam said softly. She carried the sketch out of the room like it was a sacred scroll. Liam sat there, unsure what he'd done. 10 minutes later, Mr. Green walked into the classroom, not with his usual clipboard, not with his usual smile, just the paper in his hands, and tears in his eyes. He looked at Liam. "You drew this?" Liam nodded. "Do you know who he is?" Liam shook his head. "I just see him in the park." Mr. Green's voice caught in his throat. He held up the portrait. "That man, his name is Mr. Richard Halverson. He lives 2 blocks from here, alone. I hadn't seen him in years, but when I was a kid, he was the only one in the neighborhood who'd fly his flag on Memorial Day. He lost his son in Iraq." The room fell silent, not out of confusion, but out of something deeper, something that felt like awe. By the end of the day, the principal had seen it. Then the guidance counselor. Then someone took a photo and shared it on the school's bulletin board. Then someone else sent it to the local veterans center. The ripple was quiet, but it moved fast. By Friday, a visitor came to the school. A woman in her 60s, hair pinned neatly, a poppy pinned to her collar. She was from the local War History Museum. She stood in front of Liam, bent slightly to meet his eyes, and said, "We're curating an exhibit called Faces That Served. Would you let us include your drawing?" Liam blinked. His ears were ringing. He was just a kid who liked sketching in silence. Now a museum wanted his paper? He looked at Ms. Delgado, who gave him the smallest nod, then back at the woman. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, "but only if you tell people who he is." She smiled. "That's the whole point, sweetheart. That's the whole point." That night, Liam walked home through Hollow Ridge Park, and there he was again. The old man on the bench, same jacket, same cap, same quiet. Liam stopped. This time, he approached. "Excuse me, sir," he said, nervous. "I drew you, for school." The man looked up slowly. His eyes narrowed at first, cautious. But when Liam gently held out a copy of the drawing, Mr. Halverson stared, long and still. Finally, he spoke. "That's me. But that's me when I thought no one saw me anymore." He looked up at Liam and said, "Thank you for seeing me." 2 weeks later, a folded invitation arrived at Liam's house. Cream-colored paper, gold trim. At the top, opening reception, Faces That Served. At the bottom, featuring The Man on the Bench. Pencil on Paper by Liam Carter, age 12. Liam stared at the envelope for a long time, then looked up at his mom. She was already smiling. "You ready to meet the world, Picasso?" she teased. Liam wasn't, but he nodded anyway. The museum was brighter than he expected. Not grand, not marble, not like in movies, just clean walls, warm lights, and quiet voices that sounded like respect. They'd hung the drawing in a glass frame, just slightly above eye level. A soft spotlight cast a glow over it, and beneath it, a small plaque that read, "Mr. Richard Halverson, Vietnam veteran, 3rd Infantry Division. Drawn from life by Liam Carter, grade 6, Hollow Ridge Elementary." People stood in front of it, staring, some with arms crossed, some with tears in their eyes. One man, in a Navy baseball cap, just saluted and walked on. But Liam wasn't watching them. He was watching him. Mr. Halverson had come, not in his usual jacket, not in his cap, but in his army dress uniform, faded, a bit snug around the middle, but clean, pressed, and worn with pride. He stood in front of the drawing without moving, for a full minute, maybe more. Then he turned, and when his eyes found Liam across the room, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just enough to feel like sunlight in winter. Later, during the small reception, a museum curator asked Liam if he'd like to say a few words. He hadn't planned anything. He didn't even like speaking in class. But when they handed him the microphone, his hands stopped shaking. He looked at the drawing, then at Mr. Halverson. "I didn't mean to do anything big," he began. "I just saw someone that looked like he mattered." The room was still. "I didn't know his name. I still don't know everything he's been through, but I thought, if no one else sees him, maybe a picture will help." He looked down for a second, then back up. "I guess it did." Someone clapped, then another. Soon the room filled with soft, steady applause. Mr. Halverson didn't clap. He just nodded once. A deep, solemn nod The kind that says, "I hear you." After the reception, Liam and Mr. Halverson sat on a bench just outside the museum. Not the old one in the park, but a new one, donated that very week by the Veterans Group. On the side, to those who waited to be seen. They didn't talk much at first, just sat. Then Mr. Halverson said, "I fought in 2 wars, kid. Came back from both. Lost my only son in the 3rd. He paused, looked out at the night sky. "But the loneliest thing I ever survived was being invisible." Liam didn't know what to say, so he said the only thing that felt true. "You're not invisible anymore." Mr. Halverson smiled again, not wide, but warmer this time. "No," he said. "Not anymore." That night, as Liam fell asleep, the framed copy of his drawing hung above his desk, a reminder that sometimes seeing someone, really seeing them, can be the first step toward bringing them back into the world. And he knew. He'd never look at a stranger the same way again. The exhibit ran for 2 months, but the story didn't end when the drawing came off the wall. In many ways, that's when it truly began. In Hollow Ridge, people started looking at their neighbors a little differently. At the grocery store, at the diner, at the park bench by the old war statue. They started asking questions, started noticing who was sitting alone, started remembering the names they'd long forgotten, and it all traced back to a boy with a pencil. At school, Liam was no longer the quiet kid. He was the kid who drew Mr. Halverson. Teachers asked him to talk about the experience. The local library invited him to join an event called Portraits of Honor, pairing students with local veterans to draw and interview them. At first, Liam didn't want to speak. He was still just 12, still shy, still more comfortable with paper than people. But when he stepped onto that library stage and saw Mr. Halverson sitting in the front row, wearing his full uniform again, he stood up straighter. "You don't have to change the world," Liam told the room. "Just see it. Really see it. One person at a time." Back at the park, Mr. Halverson's bench no longer sat empty. Sometimes, teenagers would stop to shake his hand. Sometimes, younger kids would wave and ask about his medals. Sometimes, adults just sat near him, silently, as if his presence alone steadied something in them. People who had lived near him for years, people who had passed him by without a word, now smiled, asked his name, brought him coffee. One morning, a high school football player sat beside him and said, "My grandpa was in the Navy. I never really asked him about it. I think I will now." Mr. Halverson smiled. "You should. Before it becomes a story, someone else has to guess." The town council, inspired by the museum exhibit, started a new initiative, Stories That Served, a program where local veterans would be invited to schools, libraries, and town halls to share their lives, not just their uniforms. And Liam? He kept drawing. But now, his sketchbook was filled with people he used to overlook. The woman sweeping the steps of the church, the retired bus driver who still waved at passing kids, the blind man who sat by the fountain and hummed old war songs. Liam didn't need to know their whole life stories. He just needed to see them. And somehow, when he did, they seemed to sit up straighter, like they'd been waiting for someone to notice. One Saturday afternoon, Liam and Mr. Halverson walked together through the park. There was a small crowd gathered near the bench. A new plaque had been installed, a simple one, brass on stone. It read, "In honor of those who waited quietly to be remembered, and the ones who finally saw them." Mr. Halverson chuckled softly. "That sounds like you, kid." Liam shook his head. "No," he said. "That sounds like all of us, when we finally start looking." They sat down on the bench, the boy who noticed, and the man who thought no one ever would. Months passed. The leaves turned, the museum rotated its exhibits, and life in Hollow Ridge slowly settled back into its quiet rhythm. But something had shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, just quietly, beneath the surface. People still talked about the drawing. Some had prints made. Teachers used it as a prompt in writing class. The veterans group turned it into the cover of their yearly newsletter. But for Liam, it was never about the attention. It was about him. Mr. Richard Halverson, the man on the bench who, for years, had felt invisible, until a kid with a pencil said otherwise. One evening in early spring, Liam sat at his desk, flipping through his sketchbook. Faces filled the pages, old, young, joyful, lonely. And on the last page he drew something new, a bench, a boy with a pad, and beside him, a veteran, smiling. He closed the book gently, then looked at the framed drawing above his bed, the original one. Still there, still watching. He whispered, "Thank you for letting me draw you." A few weeks later, Mr. Halverson passed away peacefully in his sleep. There was no family to call, but the town showed up. Veterans stood in dress uniforms, saluting in silence. Teachers from the school came. So did Liam. So did his mom. The museum brought the framed portrait back out, just for the day. They placed it beside the casket with a small sign. He was never forgotten. We just needed someone to remind us. Liam placed a pencil on the casket before it was lowered. Just one. Clean, sharp, ready. That summer, the museum made the exhibit permanent. A new section, a new title. Drawn from life, the faces we miss. And at the heart of it, still framed, still glowing under soft light, was the boy's pencil sketch of an old man sitting quietly, waiting for someone to see him. The plaque now reads, "Drawn by Liam Carter, age 12. In honor of Richard Halverson, veteran, neighbor, and reminder that no one should have to fade quietly."